Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, A-L-I-V-E, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to have Ryan Michler of the Order of Man here with us today. Welcome, Ryan.
How are you? I'm glad to be on the call today.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I have been, kind of tooling around on your website and learning more about you over the past couple months after we have been connected. And today I'm really excited to have a conversation about your new book. Is it called Sovereignty?
It is. Yep.
Yeah.
Sovereignty. And then the subtitle is The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men.
The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men. So beautiful. Yeah. I'm excited to have a conversation with you about, what sovereignty actually is. I know a big premise of the book is that men are providers, and not just financially, but, emotionally and mentally and spiritually and in the community and family. And so I'm just trying to think. I think what I really want for men most today, is for men who already know of you to get a sense, a deeper sense even, of what this book is about for you and what you want it to be in the world. And for men who haven't been acquainted with you yet, really a sense of one of the things you've talked about is that that there's a loss of what it is to be a man, and how to not define that within old gender roles, but really a sense of what you see as the potential and the possibility and, men stepping into their greatness. So thank you for being here for this conversation.
It's going to be an exciting one for sure.
Yeah. And I know, a little bit background about you, and you can add to this, but I know you spent most of your childhood without a permanent father figure, and now you're a dad yourself. And you have a community of 20,000 men strong.
Well, we've got the Facebook group that has 40,000 actually.
40,000. Amazing.
Yeah. So it's really grown, and the podcast is listened to hundreds of thousands, almost 300,000 times a month. So It's something that's really resonating with a lot of men.
I was just going to say, right, what that shows is that a lot of men are actually feeling the call, the draw to what you're talking about.
And I think it goes both ways. I think men, yes, and actually women as well, who really appreciate what we're doing, because I think they see, for the most part, a need for, just like yourself, a need for strong men to step up in their families and their businesses and communities. And so it's being received well by both men and women. Great.
I love it. Good. So, all right, where do you actually feel most inspired to start?
To start the conversation?
Yeah.
We can talk about sovereignty. I think that's the basis for what men really need to understand, and the reason I wrote the book. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, let's do that. So how do you define sovereignty?
Well, if you look at the word, the root word of sovereignty is to reign, right? Is to rule. And at the end of the day, our responsibility as men is to rule over ourselves. And that's what sovereignty is all about. It's about taking ownership and control of yourself. There's a lot of guys out there who want the title of leader and want to be influential and want to be looked at by other people as being strong and charismatic and possessing that X factor and being able to lead people into battle, whatever that battle might be. And I think that's noble. I don't think there's anything wrong with that ambition. But what I found is that very few of those men who want to step into that role have any ability to lead themselves, let alone lead other people. And we've spent our entire lives, for the most part, giving away all of the power and responsibility that we have to lead ourselves. We do it when we come up with excuses about why our relationships don't work. For example, there was a long time in my life where I actually blamed my wife for a lot of the problems that we were having in our marriage. And she would be the first to tell you that she had things that she needed to work on as well.
Right.
of course, but there's nothing I can do to control her. I see guys giving away their authority and their power to their bosses and saying the reason I don't have advancement in my career or fulfillment in my work is because my boss is a jerk. Or we give it away to the economy and that's why we're broke, or we give it away to our genetics and that's why we're fat. And it's very easy to do because it doesn't damage our ego when we make excuses like that. But at the end of the day, we give away all of the power that we have to do anything about our lives. And we basically wash our hands of any responsibility and obligation to make our life our own. And so sovereignty is about reclaiming the power that you're born with through a process of taking ownership and 12 other virtues that we go through in the book.
It's so powerful, right? And I've seen, with both men and women, but I've been coaching men also, for the past 15 years or so. And I've really seen the shift that happens going from feeling like a victim of circumstance or somebody else's rules or expectations, or, like you said, a specific person, and actually, letting go of blame, letting go of there's something outside of myself that is creating this, and actually coming back to say, no, actually, I have the power to change this. I have the power to create this. And what does it take to do that?
Well, and the hard part about that, what you're saying and what we've talked about, is that there might actually be some fault in other scenarios, or some responsibility, we'll say, in other scenarios. Right. Your wife may genuinely have some things to work on. Your boss might genuinely be a jerk. The economy might genuinely be bad. And so it's easy to take what is some truth and just focus on that.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that, again, you aren't giving yourself power to do anything about it. And so you need to, recognize that other factors come into play, but there's only one thing you can control, and that's your behavior, that's your thoughts. So focus on that, and you'll notice your life changing around when you move from victim to I'm responsible for my own life.
Yeah. So can we use a concrete example of your relationship with your wife, where at one point you said, I was blaming, or there was, and like there's two sides of every story, right? So there are things happening with another person, but how did you shift from where you were looking or standing before into, okay, I'm actually going to take responsibility?
Well, for me, it took hitting rock bottom. So my wife and I got into an argument one evening. I can't remember what that argument was about, but we were arguing about something, who knows? And I remember saying,
love that. Isn't it so interesting that we can never necessarily remember what it was actually about?
I mean, I'm sure it was insignificant, but years of being angry and bitter and resentful towards one another swelled up.
Yep.
And I remember saying to her, I don't even want to be married anymore. And she agreed to that. And so the next morning she left and took my 6-month-old son with her at the time.
Wow.
And excuse me, I'm overcoming a cold, so excuse me. But she left with my 6-month-old son. And again, I blamed her. I'm like, how could she do this? Why was she being disloyal? Why wasn't she doing the things that I thought a good wife should be doing? How could she not be appreciative of me working and doing all the things outside of the relationship? Mm-hmm. That's what I chose to see. And the reason this changed for me is because there came a point in that separation where I actually came to the conclusion that the marriage was probably over. And I didn't want that to be the case. And as difficult as that was to wrestle with, it was actually a very liberating thought at the time, because it shifted my thinking from her and trying to win her back at all costs, manipulation and the words I used and trying to get her to change and everything she could do differently. Yep. When I thought it was over, it shifted from that to, all right, this is over. Now I've got to go to work. I've got to fix myself. I want to be a better man. I want to be a good father to my 6-month-old son. Mm-hmm. And I want to be a really great catch for the next woman to come into my life. Yeah. And so I did a lot of things, and we can talk about tactically what that looks like, but I did a lot of things on my end. And what was really fascinating is as I stopped focusing on her and I started focusing on myself, it was like flipping a switch in the wall. I mean, she responded to the way that I was behaving, the thoughts that I was consuming and the actions that I was taking. And we ended up salvaging our marriage. This year will mark our 14-year wedding anniversary. We've got 4 kids now.
Wow.
We still have our challenges, of course. That's just part of being married and dealing and working with another human being, but we're in a different place.
That was a huge turning point.
Oh, absolutely. And it's that thought, that liberating thought of the marriage might be over, which again, I didn't want to wrestle with at that time,
Yeah.
has actually transformed the way that I look at my entire life for the better.
Yeah. I mean, there's two things I'm hearing. I'm hearing lots of things, but two things that are standing out to me. One, with that moment when you said, that's how I was choosing to see it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Recognizing like, oh, I'm looking at a certain facet of this multifaceted dynamic, and the way that I'm seeing it, or the lens I'm seeing it through, actually has a huge influence on how another person shows up and how we relate to each other, and all of that. Um,
Well, it is. I mean, you're right. Everything's a choice, whether we acknowledge that or not.
mhm.
It's a choice. And some people say, "Well, I don't have a choice." Well, that's a story you're telling yourself.
Yes.
And so you may be hiding the fact that you don't have a choice, but you do in fact have a choice, and you've made a choice, and it's either positive or negative. Now you get to live with the consequence of that choice. And
Yeah.
until you recognize that you do have the power to say yes or no, or to move this way or that way, until you recognize that, and then you're willing to accept the consequences, it's going to be very difficult to accept any amount of ownership in your life, and therefore the success that comes with it.
Yeah. I was like, okay, we can end right there, right?
Done. That's it. So just do that and you'll be set. Goodbye.
But there's something so powerful about the recognition that even not making a choice right now, or even, that I'm sitting here and it seems like things are happening this way, that's actually a choice.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to wrap our heads around. And a lot of this has to do with the way that, if you think about how we've grown up, the things that our parents have said and taught us. I can hear my mom saying, "Money doesn't grow on trees,"
Uh-huh.
and I can hear my teachers making us conform to these rules. And while I understand that there's a level of discipline and structure and guidance that's needed in a young person's life,
Yeah.
it also comes at a cost. And that cost is that we're sitting around waiting for permission and waiting for other people to tell us what to do and what parameters in which to live our lives.
Yes.
It isn't until we recognize that we're adults and we can make our own decisions and embrace the fact that we make our own decisions that we give ourselves the freedom to create a new life outside of what our parents and our school teachers and our friends and our bosses and
Yes.
society as a whole has taught us about the way we need to operate.
Right. All the shoulds, all the expectations. And I love that. I actually even had a moment recently in a conversation, and this happens to me a lot these days, where it's like, it's a sudden light bulb again of, oh, right, I'm an adult. I actually get to make the choices now.
Right.
I'm not still living inside someone else's, or I am in certain ways. And then this keeps revealing that I don't have to be, right? There's someone else's box, someone else's expectations, the culture, the family. I mean, it's so intertwined or whatever with with our identities and the way we're seeing the world, that sometimes it's not even apparent, like you're saying.
Right. I mean, you think about the operating system of a computer.
Yes.
And I know, like, for example, I get mad at technology. I'm like, it's not doing what I said it would. Well,
Yeah.
That's not true. It's doing exactly what you told it to do. You may not realize, because all it does is carry out commands. It doesn't think, as of right now anyways, it doesn't think about what it should do. It just executes its orders. Well, our mind works the very same way.
Yeah.
We've been telling ourselves things so long and have had those things ingrained and indoctrinated into us that we no longer question. We just carry out these predetermined tasks and orders that we've clung on to for decades, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And why, this question just came to me. It's like, why is this important to you, right? What do you see both for yourself and for other men? The recognition of sovereignty, the letting go of asking for permission. What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really reaching I shouldn't say reaching, but striving to reach my full potential. Quite honestly, I don't even know if it's possible to reach our full potential, because it's a moving target, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you expand in one area, for example, and you achieve some level of mastery, and then you advance, and that target is a little bit elusive, but that's okay. I talk about that in the book as well. And the concept
that's actually a great recognition.
Yeah. But that is, for me, is I want to continue to be better. I want to be better tomorrow than I was today, and better the next day than I was tomorrow. So that's just important for me.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to take control of my life and the choices and the behaviors and the actions, and of course the consequences that come.
Mm-hmm.
But I look around in society, and I think one of the biggest plagues in society today is quite honestly a lack of father figures in the home. If you look at the rates of fatherless homes, whether that's through dad being away and not present physically because he's away at work, or a divorce, or children being born out of wedlock. I think it's a very, very real problem.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did a post on this just yesterday, a video. We look at this active shooter situation at the school in Florida, which was horrific.
Yeah.
And just yesterday, last night, or the night before it was, in our hometown, little small hometown in southern Utah, somebody had taken down the American flag of the high school and instead put up a flag, an ISIS flag, and wrote on the wall, spray painted on the wall outside, "ISIS is coming."
Wow.
And I'm not comparing the two because they're completely different for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it paints a picture that, and a lot of people will say, well, these are mentally ill people. And that may be true.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I wonder if these people committing these horrible atrocities would not have been better served had both a mother and a father been present and had the guidance and the direction and an example to really mirror in how to behave. I had one woman get really upset with that because she thought I was being sexist, because I was saying, or she said, well, women can raise boys and do a wonderful job. And I'm not disagreeing with that. My mom raised me primarily on her own, myself and my sister. But in a perfect world, in an ideal situation, dad would be around, mom would be around, and dad would be around. I don't think any sane person would argue against that. And I think that we're seeing a dismissal of masculinity in society in general. I think men are not present in the home. I think they're very worried about stepping up even within businesses and the community. I see less and less engagement from fathers in their sons and daughters' sporting teams and outings and coaching in the community. And we're going to begin to experience more and more problems unless we as men can step up in the home and inside of our communities. So that's why sovereignty is so important to me.
Yeah, I'm appreciating that. I mean, there are homes and families where there are two moms or whatever it may be, a single mom. And, I agree that actually women can raise boys, but there is something that men or boys who become men, right, don't get when there isn't a consistent male or a few consistent male figures, right, to guide these parts. I mean, I'm actually raising a son myself, and I co-parent with his dad. But I've just been thinking, I found a book called Wild Things, I think, and certain things my son's been talking about recently. I'm like, wow, as a woman, I don't get what it's like.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't understand it. And
that's not to put you down at all. And I think that's what a lot of people think, is that somehow because I say something like that I think a woman is incapable of raising a child. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying,
I don't hear that,
is that a woman is incapable of fully developing a boy into a man, just as a man is incapable of fully developing a young girl into a woman. I don't know everything that she's going to experience. I've never sat in her shoes or have her hormones and have her thought process. And there's biological makeup behind this that makes us men and women different. And I think it's ridiculous if we don't acknowledge it and then foster those differences in our young boys and in our young girls. To treat them the same would be a catastrophic mistake in my mind. Yeah, I agree with that. And to your point, where you're raising your son and you're co-parenting, like I said, my mom did the same thing. She raised me primarily on her own, but she always had the insight, just like it sounds like you do, because you're reading books and you're getting information about what he might be experiencing. One thing that she always had the foresight on to make sure I was involved with was sports. And there was times I remember fighting with her. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm not playing football. I'm not playing baseball. She's like, no, you are. And in talking with her now, I know that the reason she got me involved is because she knew I didn't have that male presence in the home. Right. And I still needed to get it. And so I got a lot of that through my coaches, through playing football and baseball and wrestling with other boys. It's much needed in a young man's life. Yeah. And I'm thinking about what you said about the 12 virtues. I mean, we probably don't have time to go into all of them, but I'm wondering if there are one or two that you want to touch on that feel like, I mean, I'm sure they're all important, right? But of course, that really support sovereignty for a man. Yeah, it's a good question. It's a little challenging to answer. The analogy I use is a football team. If you ask somebody who's the most important player on the football
Mm,
team,
yep.
I think most people would probably answer that the quarterback is the most important. And I can see why they would say that. But if the quarterback doesn't have a running back to hand the ball off to, or a
Right.
receiver to
Then,
throw it to, or a line to block for him, is he
yep.
really relevant? The answer is no.
Yep.
So it's hard to, you can't just say, oh, just do this one thing. And you see this all the time on Facebook, right? You see, here's 5 things you need to do. And if you do these 5 things, you'll be a success. Like, well, probably a few more than 5 variables, but I hear where you're coming from.
Yes.
But in the spirit of answering your question, I can do the best I can.
Yeah. So maybe it's not necessarily talking about one of the virtues, or maybe it's going into, what are the virtues actually, or how does a man step into sovereignty with these virtues that you've laid out?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the thing that I actually label when I labeled this section, when I developed these or articulated, I guess, these 13 virtues, is I called it the code of conduct. And that's really what it is. It's the code of conduct. It's an operating system. It's the way that you make decisions. And for me, I think it's very, very important that a man and a woman have a set of guidelines and structures and parameters in place before life happens.
Yeah.
Whether that's a temptation that may come up, or being emotional in any given moment and letting that affect and cloud the decision-making process. There's a lot that can happen in the moment of certain experiences that will potentially derail us. That's why you hear guys will say, I when they step out on their wives, for example, and they'll say, well, I lost myself in the moment. I can understand. You've got raging hormones, and you've got emotions happening, and you've got maybe some resentment at home. Like, I can understand that.
Right. But it sounds like there's some kind of guiding principle, or like you said, a way to make decisions, or what your decisions are based on, this overall, in a way, operating system.
Exactly.
Right. That hasn't actually been clarified or conscious.
You haven't thought about it, right? I mean, we get this maybe a little bit and here's a couple of small examples. If somebody is religious or spiritual, let's just say a Christian, for example, has the Bible and the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments is basically a code of conduct. It's an operating system. Here's the 10 things that you will not do. Yeah. If you look at any branch of the military, they have the Soldier's Creed in their own unit creed, section creed. If you look, even pirates, which are criminals, right? And we I
think I'm just laughing because I'm like, oh, right, I'm thinking of my 6-year-old boy's version of pirates, right? But you're actually talking about real pirates.
Legitimate pirates. Right. Even pirates have a code of conduct. Yep. And these are criminals who have very little regard for other people and other people's property, and yet they adhere to a code of conduct. Interesting. Yeah. Right. Yep. And so the code of conduct is, again, within the book Sovereignty, is a set of 13 virtues. I mean, I can go through a couple of them that I think are extremely valuable. Yeah. The first one I talk about is self-reliance. Mm. If you look around in society, I think that there's this really strange idea that somehow everybody owes you something, whether that's your wife. Oh, my wife, she owes me happiness in our marriage, or my boss owes me a job, or the government in the United States owes me health insurance. And it's the furthest thing from the truth. Nobody owes you anything. Uh-huh. You have to decide if those are important to you. And if they are, then you'll go out and do what's necessary to have the things that you feel like you're entitled to. Wow. And if you look at the rate of entitlement, and I go through this in the book a little bit, with welfare programs and the abuse of some of these types of programs, it's absolutely ridiculous. But it's a testament to the fact that people want something for nothing. Mm. And it's a real detriment to their own sovereignty.
Right. And I can see where that could get collapsed a little bit with a feeling of not being worthy, or like that. In order to feel worthy for some people, I mean, this could open up a whole ball of wax, but in order to feel worthy, there is a sense of, oh, then I would be entitled to something. But that is a kind of giving away one's power, right? As you were saying before.
Well, worthy is actually a really interesting word and question. And I've actually thought about this over the past, week or two. I think it's the right word. And I'm not talking about an individual's worth. So we need to distinguish the two. Because I think human potential is unlimited. And I think we're all amazing and have the potential to be. Yes. So I'm not talking about human worth, but I am talking about look, let me give you an example. If your marriage is in shambles, I realize there's a very small percentage of the time where it's the partner's sole responsibility and sole fault, and they've done things. I realize that. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the overwhelming majority of the time, it's because your actions and the way that you've chosen to live life doesn't warrant a healthy relationship.
Yep.
And it's the same thing with weight. If you're 60 pounds overweight, the majority of the time, it's because your actions or your lack thereof warrant you being 60 pounds overweight. If you were in shape, it means that you would be doing the things that would have got you to get in shape. If you're broke, it's because your actions warrant your level of income. And I know people get so upset on this stuff.
Well, I know. And I do appreciate that you said the majority of the time, and there are all kinds of factors that play in.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
And
I think when I say that, people think, well, it's so black and white. Look, I get that there's variables and there's things outside of our control, but I personally, and I urge other people not to give away any level, even a sliver of your power into that outside factor that's completely beyond your control. It's not a healthy way to live.
Yeah. Well, right. And then there's a kind of waiting or permission seeking or, like you said, feeling entitled to something versus, okay, there's something I want, there's something I believe in, there's something I value. How am I going to make this happen? It may not look like I think it will, right? It may not, one of the things you were talking about was money. And when I heard you reading an excerpt from your book, and it's like, money is an exchange. We put a whole bunch of meaning around it, right? But as I move forward or as I value something, I may not get paid exactly what I thought I would, or I may not create the thing in the way that my fantasy looks like. But there's a way that if I'm moving forward and creating based on my values, what I believe, something happens, right? Which sounds a little bit ridiculous to say something happens, but when we have this creative force in the world versus I'm waiting, I'm expecting it from someone else, I think beauty happens, right? It's either community starts to form, or we get more in service, or we get closer to our family, or, it's, I don't know, it's a really interesting journey.
Well, the analogy in the story I always talk about, and again, I'm religious, I'm spiritual, I'm a Christian. Whether you are or not is irrelevant in this conversation. It's just the point that I'm making is I hear a lot of people will say, oh, it'll happen if it's God's will.
Right.
And I'm just waiting for God to answer. And if God wants it to be, he'll make a way. Well, you know what? God has given you all the tools you need. They're waiting for you to do something with the things he's already given you. So you guys are waiting on each other.
It reminds me of that story of I don't know if this is where this comes from, because I actually didn't grow up Christian, so I don't know. But that story of the guy who there was a flood, and the guy is praying to God. He's like, God, why didn't you come save me? And he's like, I sent you a helicopter, I sent you a boat.
Yes. And it is so true, and people overlook it and think that they're going to miraculously be saved. And yet they're so unwilling to look at the practicality or their own power they already have to be able to put themselves in a different situation.
Yeah. It's like, I haven't really thought about it this way, but it's kind of that intersection between, the spiritual realm and the human realm, right? That there's this expectation sometimes of, oh, something's just going to happen versus, oh, I am given the strength, the courage, the resources to make something happen.
Well, and again, I don't know that we necessarily want to get into the religious and spiritual conversation. We might, I don't know. I'm just assuming that. But at the end of the day, like we're spiritual creatures.
Yeah.
We can't separate the physical from the spiritual. They're combined and they're operating in harmony, which means that you're powerful spiritually as well as physically. You need to harness both.
I would love to have that conversation with you sometime, because I also, have a different background, but I identify as spiritual. So that would actually be a really interesting conversation to have at some point.
Yeah, you bet.
For now, what else do you want to say about the virtues? And I mean, self-reliance feels like a really powerful one and a powerful foundation.
Yeah, the other one that I like a lot, and I think is quite often overlooked, and we alluded to it earlier, is this idea of mastery. It's this idea of mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think people have a tendency to do is look at themselves as winners and losers, right? So we look at our bank account, or we look at the scale, or we look at our relationship, or we look at our advancement in our career, or whatever. And we determine based on the metric that we're using to measure whether we've won or lost. And what I talk about in the book is that losers quit. I mean, that's what losers do. It gets a little difficult, comes a little challenging. They give up, they throw up their hands. You know, I look at this as the immature child who's playing Monopoly and is losing. Instead of just bowing out gracefully or getting beat, they flip the whole board
across the room. Yeah.
Losers quit. That's what they do. Well. Yeah. Winners plateau. What they end up doing is they win, or they reach some level of greatness, and they stop. And you see this, and I've had conversations with my family about this. I've got some family that believes a quarterback, for example, in football should go out at the top of his game. And my thought is, if a quarterback goes out at the top of his game, he's not a master. He may be a winner, but he's certainly not somebody who's trying to master himself in the game itself.
Right. And who knows if he's actually the top of his game, or he's reached his potential, and he's cutting himself off.
So some people say in a boxing match, a fighter should always go out on a win, or a quarterback should always retire after he wins the Super Bowl. And it's like that, you may think that, but if that person is greater than just a winner, he won't do that, or she won't do that. They'll continue to drive on. And the next tier is mastery. And this idea of mastery isn't about winning or losing. It is about keeping score, certainly, but it's about improving. It's about being better every single day and knowing that there is no end to the journey. And a lot of people look at that and they think, well, that's tiring. To me, that's actually inspiring, knowing that I can wake up and be better at whatever I want to do today than I was yesterday. And the next day I can be better, and the next day I can be better. So I suggest that someone definitely overcome being a loser, overcome being merely a winner, and instead decide to focus on mastery and becoming a master.
Oh, I love that. I actually love that too, even with my son, you know, who's still at I don't know, I think this is a phase, but maybe some people, like you're saying, never actually grow out of this phase, right? It's like, I want to win. And if I'm not going to win, then I don't even want to play.
Right.
At age 6, right?
And that's certainly, there's obviously a level of immaturity, of course, with that.
Right. But for me to actually teach him from starting now, right? Oh, there's this idea actually of mastery that's beyond winning and losing. You know, that could be a very formative belief for him that will help him go a lot farther.
Well, and the other thing it does is it reframes failure. So a lot of people will, let's say they go into the gym. I'm just going to use this as an example. They go into the gym and they have this goal of the next 30 days that they want to lose 10 pounds, let's just say.
Yeah.
And at the end of the 30 days, they don't lose the 10 pounds. And then what they do is they turn back to themselves and they think they're a loser, or they're not worthy, or it won't work, and they're a failure, and they're a miserable human being. I know that sounds a little funny when we say it like that, but that is actually the thought process that people go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus deciding to adopt this idea of mastery, which is now, I didn't really fail at losing 10 pounds. I just simply missed the mark, and I'm going to go back to the drawing board, reevaluate, and figure out what maybe I didn't do quite right, and something else I can adopt into this thing and get better moving forward. It's the same thing with starting a business. You know, somebody thinks, oh, I started this business and it failed, so I'm a failure. No, you're not a failure. Your business failed. It didn't work.
Yeah.
But what can you learn so that when you get into the next business or the next idea, that you're better off than you were 6 months ago when that business didn't quite work out the way you wanted it to?
Yes. So powerful. Yeah. Okay. I feel like there's 1,000 questions I want to ask you, but for now, for time's sake, what do you want to leave men with? What feels like, I'll just leave it at that. What do you want to leave men with? What's most important?
You know, it's really interesting in writing this book. I love to read myself. I've got hundreds of books sitting behind me on my bookshelf here. I've probably got another dozen plus books on my nightstand that I'm reading through right now. And I think successful people naturally read because they're consumed with putting new information into their brain. And I think there's a lot of value into that.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about this writing process is that I'm putting together a collection of words so that other people can consume, and I want them to read the book.
Yeah.
But is that the end result? No, that's not the end result at all. Because if somebody reads the book and they decide for whatever reason that they're not going to implement any of it, that book and that $25 investment or whatever it was, and the 5 to 10 hours they took to read it is not a useful use of their time.
Yep.
So to that point, and just to leave anybody listening with, is you've got to take action.
Yeah.
You've actually got to implement this stuff. And what I see so often is people will listen to this podcast because they're interested in new ideas. They'll read a book, they'll take a course, and they'll consume. And yet they never make the transition from information to the application of that information. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I'm going to leave you with today is take one element of what we've talked about and just say, I'm going to do this for the next 30 days. For the next 30 days, I am going to fill in the blank. And you can decide after 30 days if you want to continue doing it or not. But I think action is something that needs to be fostered. It needs to be developed, and it needs to be articulated over time. And I think you'll find if you do something for 30 days, you'll either want to continue that one thing or pick something that you think will be more effective. But action breeds action.
Love that. And I actually love too, the combination of that with your idea of mastery, right? And this isn't about, I'm going to take an action so that I can win, or, I have to accomplish something or the thing I set out to, right? Sometimes it's actually about, what I learn along the way has me realize what's even more important, or what's even closer to my heart, or what would make life more meaningful, right? So I love the idea of, all right, I'm going to choose an action, and that action, it's not the end goal necessarily. It's not like, I can't, I see a lot of people in inaction, not discovering their truth or, what's meaningful for them, because they haven't taken a step, and not realizing like, I could take a step and then I could change my mind, or I could change my course.
Oh yeah. You're not pigeonholing yourself into doing one thing for the rest of your life.
Right.
Right. It's really interesting. As we got the book in the mail, the physical book in the mail, and I unpackaged it and was holding it in my hand, my wife said, "How do you feel?" And it was really interesting because I didn't feel when I was holding it in my hand. And this was my first book that I ever wrote. And writing is something that's challenging for me. So it was a real challenge. But when I was holding that book in my hand, I was excited about it. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't as excited about it as I thought I would be.
Interesting.
And I was like, well, why am I not more excited about this?
Yeah.
And the conclusion that I came to is that I was ready for the next thing. I wrote the book. I put in the effort. We went through all the hoops and everything else, and now it's completed. It's done. And I pride myself on striving to be a master. And so I can check that off the list. And my knee-jerk reaction, my thought was, good. Yeah, the book's done. What's next?
What's next? Time to move on. Well, I also feel really inspired hearing that writing is challenging for you, and you wrote a book, right? So again, it's not about, I'm going to pick the thing that I know I already know how to do, or that comes easily to me.
Right. I mean, that's fun for a minute, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's fun to do something that's easy for a minute, but then you're like, okay, that's boring.
Right.
And that's just a testament to the fact that humans love a challenge. We want to be challenged, especially men. We want to be challenged. We want to be pushed. We want to be in the trenches. We want to be battling and fighting and grinding.
Yeah.
We just like that. We want to get in the dirt and roll around and get bloody. And that's just, I like that. I think most men most of the men I talk with like that. Yeah. And if you're taking the easy route all the time, you're not really doing any of that. So find something that's a challenge and that you really have to work hard to overcome. And I think you're going to live a much more fulfilled life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And where can men find you and your book?
So just head to our headquarters, which is orderofman.com. And if you're interested in the book, you can go to orderofman.com/book, and that'll take you to a page where you can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon and get the audio version or the hardcover, whatever you want. You can get it all right there. It's all right there. Very easy. And we're all on social media at Order of Man. So it's very easy to find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Shana, thanks. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.